Well, thank everybody for coming this morning. On this lovely cold day, it should be warmer. I want to introduce our guest today, Dave Robbins. I got a whole page of notes on Dave. He's a University of Richmond graduate. He is the past president of Salem Historical Society. He's a former member of the Salem Planning Commission. He serves right now on the Western Virginia Historical Documents Preservation Trust, which is located here. That's pretty much him, my son Tyler, and Mickey Hatcher. Lefty, who is not here today because he broke his wrist and can't get all his taxes done. And right now he's working on getting the Preston Place in Salem redone, reconstructed as a historical, reopened as a historical museum. And he grew up in Volatile. I've known Dave a long time. I can sit here and talk about it. I will tell you, I served on a board with Dave a long time ago, with him and Keister Greer and Dr. Francis Amos and Gerald and Mickey. And on this board, part of the purpose of me going to those meetings wasn't to do anything with the board. It was to listen to the stories. Yeah. Dave, Keister, Dr. Amos. I mean, it was just a fascinating time to listen to things because so much ability and knowledge there. And so Dave is going to talk to us this morning about the Dunmore's War, the Battle of Point Pleasant, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. Good to be here. I've been here a long time. Gerald Vine was my best friend, and we were involved in a lot of things. And I've been in and out of they're standing out of the History Museum here, and Gerald was in and out. We were doing this. We got to stop over here and go into the Buffalo and Compass Gap and Johnny O, John O'Connor. To probably mention I know him, but anyway, it's I know a lot of folks in Floyd, including Gino, and I like to remember Gerald. He started out. He was such a great guy. Did so much for this society, and he was a great boss. And I want to talk about the document, the narrative by Lieutenant Stewart and Star Stewart, and I brought a document that I'm going to be donating to, signed by John Stewart, which is 1799, and I'm going to donate that today in Gerald's honor to the Western Virginia Land Trust, and along with probably 100 other documents that I've donated this year and using as well. So I'm going to be giving a lot of documents this year to this trust, and that'll be located here in the floor. So I want to talk about the Battle of Point Pleasant and Lord Dunmore War. I gave this talk to the Roman History Museum, and I had a narrative that was done by Mike Stevens, who was a newscaster now is the head of communications for the city of Salem. And I gave it to the Roman History Museum at the Owens and Lee. And by the time it was in the afternoon, by the time I got to the narrative, half of my audience was asleep. So I decided I'm going to do that today. I promise I'm going to have a shorter version to this. And I've given this talk also at Smithfield, outside the president of Smithfield, Peggy, President Annie, was my wife's big sister, Queen Mary, and so I'm involved. I have a lot of artifacts there at Smithfield, and I gave that talk there and have a close connection again. So we all tied together in this valley, where many of us probably related to sit down. So don't say anything about anybody because it's not Let's start with the first slide, and this is John Murray, before Dunmore. He was the fourth Earl of Dunmore. He was the Scottish colonial administrator. He was, before he came to Virginia, he was governor in New York. And he gave up that post to come here because he felt this was more lucrative, believe it or not. And then after the war, when Andrew Lewis chased him out to Glenn's Island. And he was the last colonial governor of Virginia. He came back and was governor of the Bahamas from 1870 to 1996. He directed a series of campaigns against the transatlantic tribes known as the War of War in 1774. And over here you'll see a document that was signed in July 1774. That he signed. It was a land grant to a guy named John Bowler for a piece of property, which is near Bowler's Point, which is on Lake Rimwell. But that document was signed by him to the land in July, and of course the war, the battle occurred in October. In 1775, he issued Dunmore's proclamation offering freedom to slaves who fought for the British Crown against patriot rebels in Virginia. And he did that, and we had many slaves that left, deserted their masters in slavery and went to fight with him, and they all ended up on Glenn's Island. And Andrew Lewis was the one that chased them off now. And I'm not going to get into that, that's a whole other thing, but basically, Andrew Lewis, this case, was fighting for the British, mainly for the state of Virginia. He was the head of the Virginia militia, but anyway, he and Lord Dunmore, future destiny were linked for many years. Okay. Andrew Lewis, this is a statue of Andrew Lewis. He was born in 1720, he died in 1781. He died in Bedford, Virginia. If you're coming through Bedford, Montvale, coming through Bedford to Montvale, you took a right to that recycling junk place on the left to go to the big house, the brick house that sits on the road on the left, which was probably built in the early 1800s, but there was a tavern and cabin there before. And Andrew Lewis, he was 61, which is kind of way old for that period, living in the frontier. And he got sick and died in that tavern, and then was buried in his home in Richfield. He was married to Elizabeth Ann Gibbons, and they lived in their home was in Richfield, which was part of Volatile County. But it's in the present day in the city of Salem. So Richfield, we don't know exactly where it stood, but Dr. Warren Norman, who I was involved with the Salem Star Site, he was a plastic surgeon, done a lot of research in Willie Middleton. And basically, Richfield stood, if you're at the Salem Civic Center, you come down the hill, you got the Valley Bill, which they're now doing all the 300 apartments there. It was right in between and stood on that bluff. So it stood on the bluff in those days, overlooking the river. You had the height, and most of the transportation at his time was by river. So it was a quick way around. Yes, there were trails and Indian trails, and he knew them all because he surveyed. But the house stood right there. We don't know exactly where, but we know roughly where. He fought in the French and Indian War as a captain of George Washington's Virginia regiment, and he led expeditions against the French outposts and Indian tribes in 1750. He was a member of the House of Burgess in 1769, and he fought the Shawnee tribe under Chief Cornstalk at the Battle of Point Pleasant. That's an only brave thing up a history book of someone trying to reconstruct what he looked like. And this bust of Andrew Lewis is the one that is used by a local artist that did this, and that was 70s in, it was cast, but you can see the Salem Civic Center, you have him out front with a torch and a cannon. He sort of would be shooting at his home place, really. He fired the cannon, he probably would shoot the place down. He looked nothing like that. Those are the statues that they have in Richmond, the statues they have at Point Pleasant, the statue here, didn't look anything like that. This is the only silhouette we have No, that's not it. That's it. He looks more like Benjamin Franklin. You know, he really does. And Dr. Morgan said I looked like him. He wanted to do a plastic cast of me. I always let him do it, but I didn't, and that's his signature. This is probably late in life, but you know, he sort of does. You know, he was Scottish. You know, I think Dr. Morgan said because of the nose. You know, the nose. I think he really looked like he had broken off the nose. But this is the only silhouette we have of him.
There is no contemporary painting of him. So Ann Bell is the one that did the statue and the bust, and she did that based on the coin from the 30s that a guy did for the statue, and again, none of that looks like him. So, you know, they moved Andrew Lewis. He lived there on Electric Road near where the frozen food place is, and right where now is a Indian motorcycle shop. And he was moved from there and reinterred at East Hill. So they dug him up and moved it. Morgan Griffith is a real student of and a fan of Andrew Lewis, and we talked a lot about Andrew Lewis, and they moved his grave to the East Hill Cemetery. But there are pictures that they took. His structure was there, and it's a shame we didn't have any of the body. It's a shame they didn't take a picture, so if we'd had those features, his uniform, his coat was black, he had brass buttons. We have that, and they moved him. You know, it's possible we could dig him up again and do that, but he was moved from there, from his original resting place was probably right behind his house, very close on his property. That's what he looked like. So anything you else see of him is really not him. For a while they thought this was him, and people say that this is his son. And you can see how that looks. You know, you see he's not a handsome guy that's in the other picture. And you can see how he, again, probably looks like him. He doesn't have the nose, so that came from the other side, but the other facial features are there. For a while, people thought this was Andrew Lewis, and it was represented as being Andrew Lewis, but it really wasn't. And he died, the son died on Bent Mountain in Roanoke County in 1844 at age 85. So what did the frontiersmen here wear, and what did they look like? And this is what they looked like. A fringe coat, got a powder horn over there, and this is of George Washington, an early George Washington, who was a young surveyor, a contemporary of Andrew Lewis. So, you know, they were all surveyors, and they came out here, Andrew Lewis, George Washington, William Preston, all those guys were surveyors. And when you see large tracts of land, they came here first, and they knew where the good land was, and they put claim to it. But Frank Schoonover did this illustration. He was in the NC Wyeth School of Art, trained in the Brandon Wine School in Delaware. If you've ever been, NC Wyeth and Andrew Wyeth are all, Peter Hurd was married into the Andrew Wyeth family. But Schoonover was in that school, and he this painting, I almost died for this painting. It almost killed me. It hung in the Dean's of Engineering's office at Virginia Tech, and we were doing and it's a huge painting, a beautiful painting. It looks like this. So we were doing an exhibit at the Roanoke Historic Society on the surveyors of Botetourt County, and we borrowed this painting to put in that display. And so they had, Virginia Tech had valued this at $30,000. They said, Dave, will you go get it? Because I was on the board, and we were setting the exhibit up, and I said, okay, so $30,000, I'll take a chance. I have a big Cadillac, and those days we still have, and So I went up, and the head of the dean of the school said, he helped me wrap it up, and I wrapped it up with blankets, and I put it in the back of the car, and I hauled it to the museum, because I knew how to protect it, because, it's canvas. And so we got it there and hung it up, and White nearly killed me the next week. That's when they had the shooting at Virginia Tech in the same school. If I'd have been 1 week later, I could have been in the very midst of that. It's amazing. So, fast forward, when the exhibit was coming down, Virginia Tech reevaluated their paintings. This is now worth $330,000, and I said, guess what? I'm not putting it in the back of the Cadillac and taking it back. So we had to pack it up, insure it. It cost us a lot of money to get it back up there, but it is still there, and I'm sure in that engineering office. So if you want to go to the head of the engineering department, it'll be there. So today I'm going to talk about a narrative of the Battle of Point Pleasant, which occurred on the 10th of October. And this was narrated by Captain John Stewart of Greenbrier County, which is that document signed over there, who commanded a company under General Andrew Lewis. He was Colonel Andrew Lewis at the time of said battle. Now, this narrative, I've got the cover sheet over there, but there were two of these, and it was written in 1820. Basically, he was talking about the Battle of Point Pleasant from his firsthand experience. And there were two of these documents. One resided at the North House in Lewisburg, and the other one, Dr. Mormon and I found when we were renovating the Brown House in Salem. It was empty. We had moved the house. We were restoring it, and he and I were doing the work with one of his workers and his son. And we came in one morning, the rooms were bare, and somebody left a Sheraton-style American chest of drawers, which we still have. And in it was this document. We don't know where it came from. They just left it in the thing, this narrative. And so there were only two. And so this was his narrative. It was out there early on, but it's sort of been lost in history. But when we finally fixed the Salem Museum up and set up the Logren Library, it ended up there, but it got lost because they couldn't find it till I went and said, hey, it's in with this file, because that's where I put it when we left here. And sure enough, we have it, and they have it. They have the original at the Salem Historic Society, Salem Museum, and I hope they publish it. I think they should, because he's making the case in this that the Battle of Point Pleasant was the first battle of the Revolution. And so I'm really here today to talk not about the battle precisely, but how he came to that conclusion and how other people came to that conclusion. John Stewart's father was a Scotsman. David Stewart was a follower of Charles Stewart and Bonnie Prince Charlie, who immigrated to America like so many Scots did after the Battle of Culloden. They were soundly defeated, and they had to leave, and they fled the country, some through Ireland and here, and some directly here. John was a surveyor, guess what? and built the first grist mill in Greenbrier County. He was the founder of Greenbrier County and Lewisburg. And after the war, he was clerk of court, which that document is signed by him that I'm donating, again, in Gerald's honor. He was a correspondent of Jefferson, and in 1796 he sent Jefferson fossil bones he had collected through his survey work. It's possible that they came from Big Lick, possibly. His account of the Battle of Point Pleasant is an important early source for the colonial settlements. He was the founder, as I say, of Greenbrier County. He was married to Andrew Lewis's niece, Agatha, so it was all in the family. And so he was doing the survey work in Greenbrier County. Andrew Lewis was doing the work in the valley here, and George Washington was here doing survey work, as was William Preston. This is a map of the battle, where the battle occurred. And this is Point Pleasant in this particular area. And it's at the confluence. If you haven't been to Point Pleasant, how many have been to Point Pleasant, people here? It's the confluence where the Kanawha River runs together with the Ohio River. And the battle occurred on October the 10th, 1774. So would you like to guess who owned the property? Andrew Lewis owned the property. He was given a land grant in 1770 from the House of Burgess, and for his service, he got a land grant of 3,000 to 5,000 acres of land that was in this area, in and around this part of Point Pleasant, Virginia at the time. And so when he had been out to this area about 4 years before, overlooking his property, and so he was somewhat familiar with the terrain in this area, so he wasn't totally naive to what was here. Now, this is a sketch that Captain John Stewart did in the narratives, and he was showing what it looked like from his point of view. The courthouse, the Cornstalk's grave is there. Cornstalk was the chief of the Indian tribes, mainly the Shawnee. The swamp where the battle began and where Andrew Lewis's brother, Colonel Charles Lewis, fell, and the elm tree, he's showing the elm tree. I doubt it's still there, but he's giving you this map from memory in 1820, remember. It's not written, it's written years after, and so his memory may have faded some, as all of our memories do. The Crooked Creek, the Shawnee town was there. It was an old town, and the Ohio going up this way, and the Great Kanawha coming down that way. And the Old Town Creek running through there, those were all his maps of what he felt the battle looked like. And Colonel Fleming was there. William Fleming, Colonel William Fleming was, Charles got killed. His brother got killed in the battle of Point Pleasant, Andrew Lewis's brother, who was probably more beloved than Andrew Lewis was. Andrew Lewis was sort of a stern tactician, and his brother Charles was a good Indian fighter, but people liked him. He was a likable kind of guy. And William Fleming, of course, was a medical doctor from who lived in Roanoke area. Got severely wounded in the Battle of Point Pleasant, and eventually, probably those wounds, he never recovered from those. Next one. This is sort of shows you what's there today, where the rivers come together. It's a beautiful little area. The bridge goes across the river. You come up from Charleston, and then you cross the Gallipolis. If you haven't been that way, it goes on up to Chillicothe, where the reservation was, the Indian reservation that Cornstalk, where the Shawnees held in our beautiful little town of Chillicothe, the Indian Mounds. It's a lovely drive, but take it all the way up the river, and down the river, General McCausland grew up down that river. His farm is a state historical site, but he grew up in this area, and of course he was General McCausland fought at the Battle of Hanging Rock and up and down the Shenandoah in the Civil War. So the battle occurred that morning. This is a sketch of the Shawnee movement along the river attacking the camp. So the night of the 9th, you see where Indian camp and the areas up there coming down, they had set up camp there and built rafts the night before on the 9th. So they came across the Ohio on wooden rafts somewhere in the middle of the night, on the night, came across and come down the Yarrows and were set right above. They were ready to go before daylight on the 10th. So they had to be moved, and very stealthily they had done that and Andrew Lewis really had no idea. He had scouts, but he didn't anticipate it. This point was the point that Lord Dunmore said, we want to meet, we'll meet you there. And Lord Dunmore never came. And that's part of the problem. And so, had Dunmore came, he would have had a lot of troops that would have been coming down, and also William Christian, who was coming from here, basically, he was late. He was coming in late from Greenfield and Fincastle County in those days, and he was with the cattle and the horses, and they were coming in, and they didn't make it till after the battle. There was a picture of, I think we skipped over one back there maybe. Let's go back. There's one more in here. Picture of Colonel William Campbell. Maybe not. Well, go ahead. We'll come back to him. William Campbell was, go back. Maybe it's before this. No. William Campbell was, Fincastle County only existed for a few years, and it was carved out of Botetourt County. And William Campbell was the county lieutenant and a very significant figure for Southwest Virginia. He led the Virginia militia at the Battle of Kings Mountain and defeated Ferguson in that battle. And he also led the Virginia troops called the Over the Mountain Boys, which was people from this area, in the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And it says that he fought in the battle. He really didn't. He got to the battle late. He was bringing about another 1,000 troops, which together would have probably given Andrew Lewis 2,000 troops. This is sort of an early etching of what, probably from the mid-1800s. I have history books from Botetourt County from 1820, and one of the key things is they have an etching, and they talk about the Battle of Point Pleasant. As early, even in those days, it was still very prominent in history books. It's kind of interesting. It's a really unique history book. I've only seen one, which I have, but it shows sort of what they were doing there. They were mainly, the frontiersmen were mainly still fighting Indian style. That's why the Virginia militia, they fought like the Indians did. They were not going to attack like a British regiment, frontal assault and shoot at each other on each side. They were attacked behind trees, and that's what they did. And they were able to defeat the Shawnee, and we'll talk a little more about that. This is an early depiction of the Shawnee wounded. This is what the Shawnee warriors would look like. And at the end of the battle, they buried some of their dead that they couldn't take under leaves, but most of the wounded and some of the dead they took with them back on the rafts when they retreated at the end of the evening of October 1774. That's Cornstalk leader. We have a member here who's descended from Cornstalk, and Cornstalk was a great Indian leader. He came back to talk a treaty, and he was eventually murdered at Point Pleasant, and is buried there. Which basically took the Shawnee out of the Revolutionary War because he was their leader. And so they were defeated, and Gino's going to talk about that a little bit later. And this is the grave there at Point Pleasant. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So I want to just talk now that a little bit about what the narrative I'm reading. This was all recorded, and I'll try to go through it, but let me get to my right sheet here. So John Stewart was a lieutenant. He was part of Matthew Arbuckle's command, and they were coming through the wilderness from Lewisburg in an uncharted area through the woods, cutting it, and they were cutting timber, probably using animal trails, Indian trails, and it took them quite a while to get from Lewisburg, Greenbrier to there. And he said they had cattle that was also following them and breadstuffs as they had pack horses, and he says they left for Point Pleasant about the 1st of October. And he says, where we expected the Earl of Dunmore, Lord Dunmore, would meet us with his army, who was to have come down the river from Fort Pitt, as was previously determined between the commanders. But in this expectation, we were greatly disappointed, for his lordship pursued a different route. So he said, I'm going to meet you there, but he didn't. He didn't show up. He was 40 miles away at the time of the battle. So that's why they were at Point Pleasant to start with, not to fight a battle, but to meet and then attack Chillicothe, to go after the Shawnee and the Ohio Territory. And he says, he said, we were greatly disappointed, for his lordship pursued a different route and had taken his march from Pittsburgh by land toward the Shawnee towns. He says, General Lewis, of course he was colonel at the time, finding himself disappointed in meeting the governor and his army at Point Pleasant, dispatched 2 scouts upriver and by land to Fort Pitt to endeavor to learn the cause of the disappointments, and our army remained in camp to wait their return. So they were waiting he sent scouts up and said, why aren't you here? You know, why didn't you meet me here? You said meet here, and we're going to meet, and you're not even here. He said, before we marched from Camp Union, that's Lewisburg, we were joined by Colonel Field and a company of men from Culpeper, and Thomas Buford from Bedford County, also 3 other companies under the command of Captain Evan Shelby, Captain William Russell, who was the founder of Russell County, and Captain Harbert from Holston, now Washington County. Those troops were to compose a division commanded by Colonel William Christian. Christiansburg was named after him, who then convening more men in that quarter of the county with a view of pursuing us to the mouth of the Great Kanawha, where the whole army were expected to meet and proceed from thence to the Shawnee towns. The last mentioned 5 companies completed our army to 1,100 men. During the time our scouts were going expressly upriver to Fort Pitt, the governor had dispatched 3 men, lately traders. They were Indian traders, not traders in the sense of but probably were both. These traders had traded amongst the Indians down the river, and they came down to Colonel Lewis to inform him of his new plan and the route he was about to take, with instructions to pursue our march to the Shawnee towns, where he expected to assemble with us, but what calculations he might have made for delay or other disappointments that might happen to 2 armies under so long and difficult a march to a trackless wilderness, I could never guess. How did he expect them to all link up after having to cut trees, run trails, and get there? They got here, and then, of course, the governor didn't show up. He says, or how he could suppose they would assemble at a conjuncture so critical as the business now in question required was never known to anyone. The governor's express, meaning the scouts that he sent, arrived at our encampment on Sunday, the 9th day of October. So the same time that Lewis was sending scouts up to say, where are you? Dunmore had sent scouts down the river to let Andrew Lewis know that basically we're not going to meet you there. We're going to meet you at Chillicothe and join some other place. It says the governor's scouts, meaning our embassy, arrived at our encampment on Sunday, the 9th day of October. That day it was my lot to command the guard, meaning John Stewart. One of the men was of the name of McCullough, and he was an Indian trader, William McCullough, who was from Pennsylvania, and he had been known to trade guns and weapons with the Shawnee. He was selling to the Shawnee, working as a scout. He was selling guns to the Shawnee that were probably used in this battle, but he was the scout coming down from Lord Dunmore with a guy named Simon Girty, which is, they were both were known to the Shawnee, had been in their camp. And so he's looking up John Stewart, which is part of this interesting saga, why he makes a lot of things that make sense. And he says, this man says, by the name of McCullough, with whom I had made some acquaintance in Philadelphia in the year 1766 at the Indian Queen, and that was a tavern outside of Philadelphia, where we both happened to lodge. This man, supposing I was in Lewis's army, inquired and was told I was on guard. He made it his business to visit me and renew our acquaintance, and in the course of the conversation I had with him, he informed me that he had recently left the Shawnee town. He'd just been there. So he went to the town, met with the cornstalk, went back to Lord Dunmore, and then came downriver. Okay? And he says, and was told I was on guard. He made it his business to visit me and renew our acquaintance. And in the course of conversation I had with him, he informed me that he had recently left the Shawnee towns and gone to the governor's camp, which made me desirous to know his opinion of our expected success to surprise the Indians. That not here, the Indians were going to surprise him, but going to fight the Shawnee towns, and which made me desirous to know his opinion of our expected success to surprise the Indians, and whether he thought they were presumptuous enough to offer to fight us. As we suppose we had a force superior to anything that they could oppose to us, he answered, they will give you grinders. Grinders was meat grinders. He said they were going to grind them up. And he says, and soon. And they will give you grind, and before long, and repeating over. He told him this several times, under an oath. Now, that's the interesting part of this that comes to Freemasons. Swore we would get grinders very soon. He repeated it several times. I believe he and his companion left our camp that evening to return to the governor's camp, and the next morning 2 young men set out early to hunt deer. They happened to ramble upriver 2 or 3 miles, and suddenly fell upon an Indian camp who had crossed the river on the evening before, the night of the night. Now, they came through the Indian lines, but they let them come because they knew them. He'd just been at the camp. They weren't going to fire on him, and so they let him through. And he says, they discovered the young men and fired upon them. One was killed and the other escaped and got into camp just before sunrise. He stopped before my tent, and I discovered a number of men collecting around him. As I lay in bed, I jumped up and approached him to know what was the alarm. And when I heard him declare he saw about 5 acres of land covered with Indians, as thick as one could stand beside one another, General Lewis immediately ordered a detachment of Augusta troops under his brother Colonel Charles Lewis, and another detachment of Botetourt troops under Colonel William Fleming. These were composed of the company's command by the eldest captains, and the junior captains were ordered to stay in camp to aid the others as the occasion might require. So he sent his brother out with William Fleming because they were the most experienced fighters. And so he kept the younger ones with the less experience, and he sent them out to join the battle. And so why is this important? And so it says they had met at the Indian Princess Tavern, and that was a known lodge for Masonic meetings. So John Stewart was a Freemason, had a lodge in Lewisburg, and William McCullough, in my opinion, was a Mason. because he said he gave it under oath. And he was warning him as a Mason, as a Freemason, that they're going to attack you and soon. And when he says under oath, what is that? Well, he wouldn't give him an oath, but he was giving him an oath that we know. And he was saying, hey, you're in danger. I'm letting you know. If you read that and weren't a Freemason, you would probably miss that part of this. And of course, you're looking at the next Grand Master of the state of Virginia. Will I have to bow twice or kiss your ring? 3 times, okay, sorry. And they're lucky to have him. The detachments marched out in 2 lines and met the Indians in the same order of march, about 400 yards from our camp and in sight of the guard. The Indians made the first fire and killed both scouts in front of the lines just as the sun was rising. This happened really overnight. And a very heavy fire soon commenced, and Colonel Lewis was mortally wounded, but walked into camp and died a few minutes afterwards, observing to Colonel Charles Sims with his last words, I've sent one of the enemy to eternity before me. During his life, it was his lot to have frequent skirmishes with Indians, and he's talking about Colonel Lewis, Andrew Lewis's brother, in which he always was successful and gained much applause for his intrepidity, and it was greatly loved by his troops. Colonel Fleming was also wounded, and our men had given way some distance before they were reinforced by other companies issuing in succession from the camp. So Andrew Lewis was in camp directing everything, and as they went out, he sent more troops to back them up, and we'll talk about that a little more. And he says, some distance before they were reinforced by other companies issuing in succession from the camp, when the Indians in turn had to retreat until they had formed a line behind logs. And if you looked in that other picture, you see there was some logs in the smoke. And behind logs and trees across, and then across from the bank of the Ohio to the banks of the Kanawha, and kept up their fire until sunset. So they crossed over the night before. The battle raged from sunrise to sunset. It raged the whole day. He said, among the slain on our side were Colonel Charles Lewis, Colonel John Field, Captain Buford, Captain Murray, Captain Wilson, Captain Robert McClanahan, Lieutenant Allen, probably Sidney Allen family, but probably Botetourt County as well. Lieutenant Goldsby, Lieutenant Dillon, and other subaltern officers. He says, of the Indians, the Shawnee were the most bloody and terrible, holding all other men, Indians as well as white men, in contempt. The warriors, in comparison with themselves, this opinion made them more restless and fierce than any other savages, and they boasted and they had killed 10 times as many white people as any other Indians had. They were well-formed, active, and indigenous people, and imperious in the presence of others, not of their own nation, and sometimes very cruel. General Lewis' army were all chiefly young volunteers, well-trained in the woods. To the use of arms, hunting was much practiced and referred to agriculture by enterprising young men. And he goes on to say, this battle was in fact the beginning of the Revolutionary War. That was his words. That has obtained for our country the liberty and independence enjoyed by the United States, and a good presage of future success. For it is well known the Indians were influenced by the British to commence the war, to terrify and confound the people before they, the British, commenced hostilities themselves the following year at Lexington in Massachusetts. It was thought by British politicians that to excite an Indian war would prevent the combination of the colonies to the opposing of parliamentary measures to tax the Americans. Therefore, the blood spilt in this memorable battle will long be remembered by all the good citizens of the United States and their gratefulness. So basically what he was saying has occurred, that Lord Dunmore was complicit. The most outstanding fighters at the time were the Virginia mountain men, people from the area, because they knew how to fight the Indians, and they were well trained. They grew up in fighting versus people from the Tidewater who would, by then, all those areas, Richmond that way, they had guns, but they were part of more of an organized militia. They were not Indian fighters. They didn't fight stealthily. And so he basically was saying that Lord Dunmore allowed this to happen. He knew it was going to happen. And he goes on to quote a passage. He says, again, this is Lieutenant John Stewart. He said, "And I'm more confirmed in this opinion that it was the first battle from what General Lewis told me in the year 1779, that he was informed that on the evening of the 10th, the evening of this battle of October, the day of our battle, that Lord Dunmore and noted other Tory, Dr. Connolly of Tory memory, with some other officers were taking a walk, when Dunmore observed to the gentleman that he expected by that time Colonel Andrew Lewis had hot work. And this corresponds with my suspicions of the language of McCullough." So he's saying that at the same time he has someone that says that Dunmore knew that they were going to be attacked and used the hot work versus the grinder. And so basically that's why he's made this contention. It truly was the first battle of the Revolution. And he said, "And this corresponds with my suspicions of the language of McCullough, who promised this grinders. For had not McCullough seen the Indians coming down the river, and on his return the evening before the battle, they could have not known the strength of our army, or the amount of our troops so correctly as they certainly did. For during the battle I heard one of the enemy holler out with abusive terms in English that they had 1,100 Indians, roughly the same strength of the Virginians. And 2,000 more coming." Well, that was to offset the William Christian group that was coming to join them, which didn't make it on time. And the same boast was vociferated from the opposite side of the river in hearing of many of our officers and men who occupied the Ohio bank during the battle, as the number mentioned of 1,100 was precisely our number, and an expectation entertained by some that Colonel Christian would come on with 2,000 more. The intelligence must have been communicated to the Indians by the governor scouts. Not only that was communicated, but where he would be at this point. So Lord Dunmore said, "Meet me there," and the feeling by Lieutenant John Stewart is he was set up. And had the Indians, the Shawnee, defeated the Virginia militia, which they didn't, thank God, then the English would have been able to push us out of that whole area, and they would have had a major ally to fight with them during the Rev War. So it's an interesting narrative, and I'm sure there's always both sides to history. But this narrative, I hope that we study it more, because, again, this is the only existing copy. It's the only one. And it hasn't been talked about, and I'm one of the first ones to do it. So, Gino, you have a couple things I want Gino to read.
You want me to read this first?
Yeah.
And this is from the documentary History of Dunmore's War 1774 by Thwaites and Kellogg. It is not proposed here to narrate in detail the events of the memorable battle and the death of the gallant Charles Lewis and his fellow officers. That is more effectively done by the actors themselves in the contemporary documents published for the first time in the present volume. One movement, perhaps unduly magnified by secondary writers, received scant notice in these documents. That is the attempt of Shelby, Matthews, Arbuckle, and Stewart to flank the Indian line by a march along the east bank of Crooked Creek. The Indians apparently interpreted this as the reinforcement of Christian, who did not in fact arrive until midnight. Thus the Aborigines made a rapid retreat half an hour before sunset and withdrew their dead and wounded across the Ohio. At first the whites could not believe that their stubborn enemy had fled, but it appears that the braves were disheartened. At the council of the tribesmen held to decide their action, Cornstalk caustically proposed that all their women and children should be killed, and the warriors go forth to battle until they too were slain. Receiving no response, the chief exclaimed, "Then I will go and make peace." Forthwith, Matthew Elliott, a white man with the Indian Army, was sent to intercept Lord Dunmore's advance, and if still possible, to accept terms which the governor had previously offered.
So basically what happened was that flanking maneuver, the Indians interpreted it as Christian arriving, and that's why they fled. Because if not, they could have possibly beaten they were on equal terms with the numbers in the field, but they knew that other company was coming because Dunmore had already told them that. And so, but that flanking movement that John Stewart and Shelby were part of, they interpret that because they went around and interpret that as being the boys from Fincastle County, William Christian, coming in, and so they knew they would be outnumbered if that happened, and that's why they retreated.
And this is from Robert Douthit Stoner's Seedbed of the Republic, 1962. The battle has been considered by many historians as the beginning of the American Revolution. In 1908, the United States Senate, in passing an appropriation bill to aid in the erection of a monument at Point Pleasant to commemorate the Battle of the Revolution, fought at this point between colonial troops and Indians, concurred in that opinion. President Theodore Roosevelt once wrote, "Certainly in all the contests waged against the Northwestern Indians during the last half of the 18th century, there were no other where the whites inflicted so great a relative loss on their foes. Its results were most important. It kept the Northwestern Indian tribes quiet for the first 3 years of the Revolutionary struggle, and above all, it rendered possible the settlement of Kentucky and therefore the winning of the West. Had it not been for Lord Dunmore's war, it is more than likely that when the colonies achieved their freedom, they would have found their western boundary fixed at the Allegheny Mountains. But could we have won the Revolution without the victory at Point Pleasant? As it was, we were extended to our limit. This victory stabilized the western frontier of the colonies sufficiently that they were able to hold this flank with their militia, with the exception of a few regular colonial troops stationed at Fort Pitt. The holding of this front, along with the suppression of the British Tories here, constituted much of Botetourt's effort in the winning of the Revolution."
And that was Theodore Roosevelt, of course, who San Juan Hill, and became, he was quite a historian. He wrote a lot of books about, he was Secretary of the Navy before Roosevelt was, after San Juan Hill. But he makes the point, and Douthit brings that Bob Stoner lived at Santa Lane. You all know where Santa Lane is. He was a clerk of court of Botetourt forever. I knew Bob Stoner growing up. I guess that's what you get for being old. And but basically, Roosevelt made the point that by doing that, it neutralized the tribes that allowed the Virginians to, and all up and down the mountains, to join the Continental Army and have a greater fighting force against the British. And that's an interesting point that I came upon. That interesting, the Stoner would pull that up from past history. He was a great historian and a great guy. So the whole point here is to just give a light to what Lieutenant John Stewart felt and why he felt that way. And there are many reasons. History changes. It's always changing, and you just have to be a student of that history and have an open mind. I'm sure there's a other side of this can be arguable. I know it was in Lexington Bridge, but basically, the British used allies to fight for them, the Hessians. This was just the Shawnees that they were, and had they defeated the Virginians, then I think the Revolutionary War would probably not have occurred, at least when it did. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I hope I haven't put anybody to sleep. It's taken a little, about an hour. So, any questions anybody has? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, first let me say that I don't hear real well.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So if my question you've already answered, I'm sorry. But I'm interested in cornstalk. Did I understand you to say that after he wanted his men to fight to the death and kill the women and children? But anyway, and no one would join in his tribe with him in that he was going to seek terms?
Yeah, he sought terms, and Lord Dunmore proceeded quickly to get there before Andrew Lewis could, and he gave him terms. He gave him terms. But then after that, he came to another treaty at Point Pleasant and was killed. But Andrew Lewis got there, Lord Dunmore got there and gave him peace treaty terms that were very friendly, because if not, and I didn't get in, I'd be here for 2 hours going through this, but basically Lieutenant Stewart said, had the Virginians got there first, they would have probably mastered the whole tribe, because they were that mad, and they felt that Dunmore had betrayed them. But Dunmore got there first, negotiated the peace treaty, and when Andrew Lewis said, that's all over, we've negotiated the treaty. And he talks about this. So you see how all that was coming down? Because Dunmore had set up a deal with the Indians to start with. But yeah, he went to Chillicothe. They ended up meeting at Chillicothe because after they met, but Dunmore rushed there, signed a peace treaty with Cornstalk. But Cornstalk was ready to fight to the death because he knew the Virginians were coming after him. That's what he feared, and they were. And had they got there, he knew that they were going to get killed. Now, I don't know if that's what was said, but in essence, there was a treaty signed.
So the second meeting, when Cornstalk came
Back to Point Pleasant. That's when he was. Yeah, they brought him down supposedly, but basically to kill him. He got killed. And she may tell you more about that. I haven't studied that. I haven't studied that era, that part of history. But he was killed there and buried there.
There's something I was wondering about, and I noticed when he's talking about casualties, the colonel got killed, the captain got killed, the lieutenant got killed. And then he might at the end say some other
Subalterns, he said.
Yeah.
Minor
So he's just, it's just the officers are the important ones that are mentioned, as opposed to the officers taking very aggressive leadership roles, and they're just getting killed in disproportion because.
Well, they were out front, they were leading their men. And that's why after the war, many people were not happy with Andrew Lewis because he wasn't out front. He was back at the camp directing everything, which he should be, because he was sending forces out and he was seeing what was going on, and he knew the terrain. And so, but when his brother Charles Lewis got killed, there were negative songs written about Andrew Lewis after this battle. But you have to understand, he was the commander standing back to say to go out. Unlike George Patton, who was out front, and his brother went out front and got killed. Well, that's valiant, but, when you're fighting out front and face to face, you're going to get killed. And it's sad, because Charles Lewis was a really great commander, and as was William Fleming, And of course, there were quite a few injured, soldiers as well. Quite a few militiamen got wounded, and a lot got killed. But probably far less had that flanking maneuver not occurred. There would have been far more killed, because they only fought that one day, and then they retreated because they felt, hey, Christians come with these men, we would get the heck across the creek and back to Chillicothe.
So the way you describe it is like Lord Dunmore used the Shawnee to an effect with Pearl Harbor type sneak attack that started off the Revolutionary War. Was it just the senior Tories in Dunmore's cadre?
Well, he had the British troops with him, and the Pennsylvanians. You have to remember, McCullough was a Pennsylvania trader, and Pennsylvania disputed the Virginia claims to that Ohio territory. So they had another reason for doing that. Had Virginia's been decimated, they would have taken over those land grants.
This is sort of a background question. I know that George Washington was a surveyor, and that you mentioned many of these people
Right.
were surveyors.
Right.
And so they knew the land, and then when they got a land grant, they knew what part to get. Was that an official position, or were they
No,
surveying as sort of just,
No, they were official for the state of Virginia.
oh, they were, okay.
And so Mickey, Mickey, I got Mickey in my mind. Gina, why don't you tell them a little bit about the documents that I'm donating 100 plus documents of
Back there on the table, I guess the easiest way to start, there's a map to the second map there. It's not it's the one, Linda, if you'll hold it up, it's Lee Hilton's map. This is, okay? A gentleman by the name of Lee Hilton has spent his whole life, he's continuing to work on it, developing this map. These are the land settlement records, the initial settlers in Floyd County, okay? I get a call from Dave one day, and I'm driving down the road, I'm going to Richmond for something. And Dave says, do you know this St. Mere fellow? And I had looked at Lee's map, and I recognized the name. It's a tract of land right over here outside of town. And for whatever reason, it was a useless piece of knowledge, because but I knew what he was talking about. And Dave says, well, I've got a document and some more documents that relate to Floyd County. So what Dave is donating through the document preservation, long name, but the trust, the LLC that Tyler and them have set up, are the records that were handed to the surveyors. They were the actual land grants that said, survey off 300 acres or survey off 500 acres for so-and-so. Could be for military service, which a lot of it was. And those are the original records. I can now take, and anybody that wants to research a piece of property, eventually will be able to take those documents, track it all the way through to today, from the original settlement record that came from the Commonwealth, that was handed to somebody and said, here's your land for your military service, and you'll be able to track it through Lee's map, know where it was at, and then be able to track it all the way to today.
So,
And those records, and I will say one of the things about it, those records contain, and they were used as cash.
yeah.
Because what they would do is they would get one, say somebody would get one, and he would sell it and convey it to somebody, and all he would do is convey to so-and-so on the back of the document and sign it. And these records contain some of the only signatures of these people that would have settled and owned property in this county.
Yeah. So these documents, there are probably 100 of them, I would say.
Probably more than that. But
Maybe more, that basically were Virginia land treasury warrants. And so what happened, if you fought in the French and Indian War and you were entitled to get land, they were given this document for 200 acres or 1,000 acres, it depended. And then they would take that and give it to a surveyor. And this particular group, the surveyor was the Kent Cowan family in Kentland down on Price's Fork. And I came by them. They were in a shoebox from the family. The mice had eaten them. I've conserved them and had them for years. Put them in acid free. But basically, what was happening, they would take that and then they would keep those. The surveyor would send in the survey, and then the land grant would be issued based on that. And so when I'm looking through all of these, I'm saying, my goodness, they're out. And so basically, they were written in 1781. They were written at the time of the Revolution. So all these grants go back to the Revolutionary War, but it's for service in the French Indian War, or if you could buy it, you could buy the land. Right. And so I'm looking through these, and I'm saying to myself, well, gosh, this is a place on the New River, and this has got 100 acres of land, and right next to it is another 100 acres of land, and this one sold for, 200 pounds, and this one was 5. And I'm saying, well, why is that? Anybody want to guess why that was? No. They were Tories. They took the land from the Tories because they had to flee, and they were forced to sell the stuff for nothing. And that's how the large estates like Greenfield and all those plantations were put together. They were buying these up, putting them together. But this shows the original people, they may have been signed 3 or 4 times where they kept transferring to this guy to that guy, and eventually they did the survey. But it was the Cowan family that had these. And this was done right after Fincastle County was dissolved, and Montgomery County. That's these right. Are all from Montgomery County. And of course, in that period, during the Revolution, Floyd was part of Montgomery County. And it's a treasure trove, and I wanted it to come back here. I've got some for Botetourt. I haven't given them all up. But the ones that involve Floyd and Montgomery County belong here. And it just so happened that Hilton, what's his first name? Lee Hilton has spent his whole life on that. And so when we put that together, now it's being digitized. Tyler's the president. I'm the vice president, and Lefty Hatcher is the secretary treasurer.
Mickey broke his wrist is why he's calling him Lefty.
He's not here because he's trying to do taxes. So the good news is that we'll have those being
right.
here.
And part of other things, it's
yeah.
part of other documents and things, because we can track everything, just about everything, because Lee has all the land warrant grants in Richmond. He's got them. He just hadn't been able to fit them all. And some weird things. The 60,000 acres that went to Light Horse Harry Lee for his service in the Revolution, it was not done as a grant necessarily, but that was land we think was taken from the Tories and given to him for his military service out along the Buffalo. And so there's a whole story to tell, and obviously it's all this stuff. The Oxford Academy's tied up in all this, trying to get it ready so we can.
But it's going to be preserved here, and it's going to bring a lot of people here. Yeah. But it doesn't need to be in a shoebox with the rats eating it. And I was able to save it, and I've had it stored forever, and I want it out in the public domain, and that's what we're doing.
That's what we're working on right now.
We're getting it out there. So Slusher, for instance, Slusher's, you probably got ancestors there, and there's ancestors in there you probably don't even know about, because that's the only document that's probably, and a lot of them couldn't sign. A lot of times it's X. A lot of people are literate, they especially. So it's a treasure trove of documents for not only Floyd, but Montgomery County.
That's right, and you take those documents and you put it with Lee's map, which the two did not know they were doing all this. So when you put them together, though, you can now track everything all the way through. If you really want to do a history of your piece of property, you can now do the whole thing, eventually do the whole thing. Can't do it yet because we don't have everything.
So at 79, there'll be more coming here.
We're working on it.
And we have, and I want younger folks involved. So, we're not going to be around forever. Gino is a younger guy. Tyler is definitely a younger guy, and it's that group of interest, and we have to spur that interest in younger people. We have to get them interested. What's your heritage? What's your ancestry? We've missed that part. We grew up as Virginians studying it. It was part. I don't know about California, but. You studied your history, I'm sure, in California as well.
Don't quiz me on
Yeah, I won't. But
I'm a Virginian.
you are now because you live here.
This is where my family
There,
lives.
that's right. Yeah.
Maybe a long time ago.
And so basically, we need to preserve that history, But getting it out digitally is the key, because, you know, getting it out where people can go back and say, oh my goodness, that's my ancestor. I didn't even know that existed. But it's kind of interesting of that history, and this area is so rich in that, and the Virginians in the Rev War, William Campbell, George Washington, they were all Virginians.
Is there a way to keep up with the progress of how things, when things get digitized, when people
Become a member for the Floyd County.
And using the website, because eventually all this will be hooked in together. It's a separate corporation, but it'll be tied into what we're doing with the Historical Society.
it'll be on the website?
Yeah, eventually that'll get done. The next step, the biggest thing is trying to get the facility so we can humidify and do some things. with
Store
the
them
documents
properly.
And get the scanning done, and that Oxford Academy is critical to that part of the process. I will tell you, we are full at the museum. It's a great problem, but we've got to move on to sort of next steps and in order to get the facilities expanded a little bit, and that's what we're doing. And that would be the next thing. And Jim knows we little tentacles all over, but trying to get all that done and get it done. But yeah, that's the best way, is just to keep going through the Historical Society. I would hope in 24 months we'll have some of this done. Obviously, it's got to be indexed because there are lots and lots of names on these documents. But with the map, it makes it a little bit easier because we
That
can
work's
now,
already been done.
Yeah.
A lot of it. Yeah.
a lot of it fitted in right there
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the thing. And I know that Mr. Hilton, from talking to Lee, a lot of that map, he has the rest of it that's not filled in. He just can't figure out how to, it doesn't match boundaries. And so we know eventually all that's there because he's been pulling that. Dave found everything. That is a tremendous piece of work that he did back there.
Yeah.
I don't know that anybody really understands how much time that took.
Amazing.
Yeah, Con.
The neat part is he did a grid reference, and he has the name of the owner of the land, the date, and how many acres
Yeah.
to go with.
And we eventually can take that and back it into our documents and that sort of thing. So
It's amazing that comes together. So if you have an old shoebox full of papers that the rats are eating, make sure to put it in acid-free folders.
yeah, and that's one of the things we want to do too. This corporation is set up to handle those documents and to become sort of a document depository for the county records, those kinds of things, so we can keep them separate and apart and get them. And yeah,
I don't know how to phrase this. Will any of the information, for lack of a better term, bleed over into land that, okay, I'll use my family as an example. Before it got sold, years ago, we had land that had been in my family down in what's called Deepwater, which is close to Floyd County line.
Right.
Been in our family since before the Revolutionary War. Will there be information, and Carol was part of Grayson at one point, will there be any information for areas like that that are really close to Floyd, but not?
Well, all these are from Montgomery County,
yeah. These
not
were
just
the
Floyd.
Montgomery County survey.
Montgomery
records.
County, at that point, went all the way west. It could be in there.
There are pieces
You
that
just-
may be in there, but
Yeah.
what I have found so far is that these are New River. There are some New River, and there's a lot of Little River stuff. That's how I can track a lot of that.
On the rivers.
But I can't tell you specifically about whether there would have been anything there yet. Maybe.
But it's worth looking
Oh
into.
yeah, yeah, it's possible.
And so,
The surveyor that was doing the surveying primarily worked sort of a quarter from Floyd into what is now Montgomery, Pulaski, and into the western part of that track. It's what it looks like to me that surveyor sort of had that area. But again, we don't have all of them cataloged, and we don't have everything indicated.
which was the Kent family.
Yeah.
It was the Kent family of Kentland. Kentland, which is at Price's Fork, the Virginia Tech owns, there's a house there. This is the family they came out of. and I have the bed from Kentland. It came with them as well. I bought that from the descendant. He didn't want it, and I said, hey, I want that bed. So I have the bed from Kentland from Joseph Randall Kent, who was the largest slaveholder at the time of the Civil War and died in this bed that he made for his bride in 1830 because he was totally bankrupt. Obviously, he lost everything he had except that plantation.
Just want to thank you for explaining the connection between the surveyor and the landlord.
That's right, yeah,
I've never
yeah.
understood
Yeah.
how they
Yeah.
apportioned that and how they figured that
Yeah,
out.
so, but you could also buy chunks of land. You know, there were people, Brian, I think was the name, that would buy land, he would pay for that land, and he'd also get that. And in that is land, thousands of acres. It went up, that we have as well. Not all, I gave the ones here in Montgomery, but the land all up to Charleston, West Virginia, tracts of land, thousands and thousands of acres. And anyway, I want it in the public domain.
Yeah, you know, and I will tell you too that there must have been a pretty good path through this area up to Gallipolis and around Point Pleasant, because that's also part of what was, Gallipolis was sort of the end of the slavery trail
Right.
coming out of here. You know, Levi Coffee and everything coming up with the Underground Railroad, and it ended up at Gallipolis. That was one of the terminuses of the Underground Railroad. So this area, this whole thing must have been a well-traveled, considered for the time, up until the end of the Civil War.
And I'm not a Rev War historian. I'm really a Civil War historian. The Battle of, Jubal Early, the Battle of Hanging Rock, but we're going to be coming, setting up in the exhibit on the 250th.
Yeah, this year, and I will mention that real quick. The museum will open on the 10th of April. It is a military theme this year, but it will focus a little bit on the 250th.
You might want to go. I'll show you a picture. Go to the very, very end. We didn't get there. Go on. That's a powder horn. You'll see one similar over there. And yes, that's the musket. I have a lot of things. This is now a lot of Rev War stuff. Lord Moore is at the Roanoke History Museum. If you see anonymous, I'm anonymous. And so we're taking those down on April the 8th. And then Gino and I are deciding, I'm going to put some at Preston Place. I'm taking over the oldest house in Salem, Preston Place, the old tea tavern. And we're running those, and I'm going to have a small exhibit there. But a lot of them are coming here for your exhibit. Yeah. And we're going to be working on that between the 8th and it's coming down from the Roanoke Museum, coming here.
We're opening on the 10th, but the 25th is the open house. And hopefully by then we'll have everything in it. It's a military theme. It's not just the Revolutionary War period. It'll be all the way through, focusing on people who serve. There also is a non-military component to all that too, in terms of service to the country and that sort of thing. And we're sort of focusing on that as part of the 250th. In June, I'm going to be doing a tour of the Pine Creek Cemetery, which contains the graves of multiple Revolutionary War veterans that settled here. And then on July the 4th, we're going to do a wreath laying down there at the DAR marker in conjunction with other groups in the community to recognize their service and that are buried there, because that happens to be the largest number, I think, in the county in a single place. So, keep those things in mind as we're celebrating the 250th and going through that part of it.
And I was born in Botetourt. My ancestors lived there. I live in Salem, but my heart is also in Floyd. I'm great bluegrass country, and more of my music collection will be coming here to Floyd. Well, sorry to take so much time. Thank you for coming. I hope you got it.